After the evening matches, probably about an hour.
Mickey, man. I'm glad you're here, but you didn't see me. Never still didn't see me play good.
Joe, could you tell us why did you call that timeout? At point game, it was, you were in control of the game. You were clearly, about to win the game. At that moment, could you tell us your strategy to call a timeout at that point?
Well, it's an interesting question. I think part of human nature is to be very competitive. I think if you have two old ladies sitting in a rocking chair, each old lady will try to say that she rocks better than the other old lady. You could have two old men, they could be both dying of cancer in a cancer ward, and yet one old man will say, but I can still beat you in checkers. People are just naturally competitive. I don't know if that's genetically embedded in the in some kind of gene or what, but I believe that it's true, and it's a rare person that overcomes that. So that's part of it. There's also, I think, a natural sadism that exists in people that comes out during sports, where a lot of times you just don't want to beat the person, you want to really crush them psychologically, you know what I'm saying? So the timeout that I called a point game, I always like to do that, was intended to prolong that moment of agony between the precipice of knowing he will certainly lose and the losing. In other words, at the end of the game, that's a release of the tension. And what I wanted to do was hold him in that pattern, that state of angst, as long as I could. See?
I understand.
Now, normally, when I'm playing very well, what I used to do is I used to keep the game going. In other words, I'd have 20, the guy would have 12, and I'd start serving up, and I'd let him serve a few times, and I would really create tremendous tension, But I was playing so bad against Albert that I didn't feel that I had that ability to do, But the minimal psychological damage that I could inflict was just to call the timeout and let him suffer for that 2 minutes, knowing that he was in the vice.
Right. Now, on a more subtle level, you were kind of playing with the weakness of his left hand long. You were at it sometimes, and you were not at it other times, so we never knew when it was coming up. Was that also a psychological ploy on your part?
Well, most people, their left is weaker than their right, and he was hitting the right. When I hit it to his right, he was hitting it fairly well, And again, normally it wouldn't matter what he did with his right hand, because I could always neutralize it, but I just wasn't playing well, and I needed a weaker return from the guy. So it was common sense to hit it to his left. I don't think that was psychological. That was just a survival tactic.
Had you had the sense that you had broken through with him, that he had, had there been a particular moment you said to yourself?
Not during that game. I think that was already done. In other words, we've been adversaries for 10 years, and I won about 30 singles tournaments, and he won 2, So I think that had already been established, before the game, And, I was just trying to maintain that, you know what I'm saying?
Now, the other side of this competitiveness is another game I saw you play a preliminary game after you had very clearly established that you were going to win the game. You were just kind of hitting the ball up against the wall with a little push. You were making no effort at all. The other player was watching this and still couldn't beat you on the volley. Was that an attempt to reestablish on a different level of kind of competitiveness, almost create another game?
Well, to me, if I have to play very hard against someone, that's giving them an equality that I don't feel that they deserve.
Right.
So my goal is to win the game with as much dispatch and as much ease as I can. In other words, there's no point in winning the game if he's going to try 100%, I'm going to try 100%. Now we're equal. Now, I don't feel that that's. I don't feel that there's any opponents worthy of that. So if I have to try hard, I feel very ashamed.
Are there certain opponents whom you try hard against? I mean,
well,
who pushes you?
before this last match with Albert, I would say no one, you know, because Al Torres is a little too old right now, and Danny Moroni is a little too injured, and there's no one really young enough, that's strong enough, that's coming up.
Are there certain players whom you would have liked to play against, like Steve Sandler?
Yeah, I would have liked to play Stevie a lot. Right. Stevie was very good.
Now, each of these players has a particular style. Like I have the feeling about Steve Sandler that he seems to be very hip in a peculiar way, sort of elegant and smooth. And is it interesting to work into the style of another person at the same time that you're competing against them? Is there a kind of an intimacy, a kind of a connection that you make with them?
Well, yeah, there's no question about it. No question about it. It's almost. Did you read the Malzberg book, Tactics of Conquest? Yeah. Where they were like deadly enemies, and yet they were like homosexual lovers, and this guy's fantasy, and you know, like he would throw the chess game in 3 moves, and yet he'd be convincing himself how he's really demoralized his opponent by showing his lack of care, and you get into like weird head trips with people, especially if you played him all the time or whatever. But the game with me and Steve would have been very ugly. Would have been a very ugly game.
Why?
Well, he had like, you know, he had a kind of a quality where he would like whine if he didn't get what he wanted. You know what I mean? If he didn't get a call, if things weren't going his way, and I kind of have that quality too. You know, so like it would have been very, very intense. You know, because he was never afraid. You know, he could be losing 19-0 and he wouldn't be afraid. You know, and I'm the same way. You know. And he had great physical skill, you know, and I think that I have even greater, you know. Physically, I'm definitely superior, but he had like a good serve, you know, but it would have been interesting, you know, it would have been very interesting, because we both would be like attacking the refs, and we'd be talking to each other. I don't think anyone could have reffed that game. It would have just been wild. It would have been out of control, you know. It would have been a good game.
So there would have been a ferocity that would have been really exciting.
Yeah, it would have been as if 2 Muhammad Alis could have boxed one another. You know, in other words, Muhammad Ali had Joe Frazier, but Joe Frazier was not Muhammad Ali's equal in any way. You know, not his intellect or his elocution or his. He was just like a bull, you know, and Ali was the matador. But this would have been too. You know, it would have been like there was no one for Bobby Fischer to play in Fischer's prime. You know what I'm saying? And you know. There was no one to finish Einstein's equations for him. You know what I mean? So it was that kind of thing. You know?
Now, a player like yourself is not a reactive player. A player like yourself imposes a style on the game. Was that equally true about him? And do you feel that there would have been a kind of a confluence there where either his style or your style would have been the dominant? How would you compare styles also?
I think that that's a very good point. In other words, in tennis, let's say, every person in the Pro Tour in tennis can make every shot that any other person on Pro Tour. They can all execute the shot the same way. What separates them is the shot selection. It's what shot you go for. Because in tennis, there's a minimal amount of shots, really. You know what I mean? There's a few passing shots, and that's about it. You know? You go left, right, and that's it. So in handball is really the same way. All of us can hit a killer. All of us can like lift the ball more or less equal. And the you know, the physical talents kind of even out. You know, the guys that hit hard, they're a little slower. The guys that are smarter, usually a little physically weaker. You know, it all kind of evens out, and it comes down to styles, like in karate. You know, they say Bruce Lee was the best because he mastered most of the styles. You know, he just fused all the styles together. So. My style, I think, was more aggressive than Stevie's. You know, Stevie would like wait for the ball to come to him and then like pick a spot, whereas I like attack the ball. You know, and you know he played a lot of defense. You know, he had great offensive weaponry, but he's really known for his defense. You know, whereas I have great defense, but I'm more known for my offense. So that would have been the style confrontation.
I noticed though, against a shooter though, you will volley. You know, you will keep the ball hard.
Well, that's the thing. I'm not afraid to volley either, because I know that, you know, the other person should miss before I'll miss, because I'm faster, I have longer reach, I have more stamina, I have more nerves, I have more physical placement skill. So I'm supposed to win that volley. The longer the volley is, I'm supposed to win.
Now, on the certain days that you go out, I know that you were frustrated with the game that we saw. Are there certain days that you go out and you know that you're going to make the hard shot, you know, the difficult shot, and there are other days when you feel as if I have to watch out because I'm not going to make anything today?
All my life, and this was true for Steve Sandler also, all my life I've always been able to instantly make myself play good. It's like a light switch where I could say, okay, I have to play good now, and I would do it. Whether it was a money game or a tournament or just I wanted to show off in front of somebody. The match with Albert was the only time in my life where I was not able to put that switch on. And it was very scary, you know what I'm saying? It was very scary for me. In other words, he was irrelevant. He was nothing. It was my struggle against myself and against the referees. He was just a vehicle, you know.
Is it frustrating to play a player like Albert, who's essentially a reactive player? He hasn't got a style.
No, it's only frustrating when I play bad. I told you, he doesn't mean anything. He's of no importance.
Yeah.
Because, you know, Louis XIV said, I am the state. Well, I am really handball today.
Yeah.
These guys are just trying to, you know, maybe get lucky and win a game here or there, but they don't have a...
So essentially how you feel is it's like Muhammad Ali, where he almost seemed to be alone in the ring. You hardly noticed his opponent.
Yeah, well, yes, yeah, I agree.
So you create these dramas perhaps out of boredom or out of a sense of...
Traditionally it was out of boredom, but again, I didn't have the luxury of being bored in the Albert match because I was not myself. I don't know the reason for that, you know.
Now, I was interviewing Al Torres, and he was frustrated also because he was making a lot of errors, and he said it was coming from the fact that he played only once a week.
That he played once a week?
Yeah, he felt that he could have been a better player if he had the kind of mental concentration that came from playing 3 times a week or twice a week.
But all that would have happened is he would have gotten injured. You understand? In other words, you know, the more you play, the more you're injury prone you are. You know, it's a miracle that he never got injured, and probably the reason he didn't is because he didn't play that much. So he might have been a little better, but his career would have been short.
Right.
You know, Steve Sandler was almost washed up by like 32, 33. He had knee operations when he was 16, 17. His arms, he had operation. His right arm was incapacitated for 2 years. He couldn't play. So, you know, Oscar Obert, one of the greatest players who ever lived, he was completely washed up by 30 years old with a bad back. Ruby Obert, another great player, completely washed up by 30. Had to change his whole swing. He had to swing underhand and just lost 40% of his power in his right arm and never got it back because he had a bad arm. Hershkowitz was on all kind of painkillers and steroid injections in his knees to keep him going on the court. I'm really the only person, with the exception of Al Torres, who had the kind of longevity that I had. But I think of the truly great one-wall players, there were 4 of us. There was Hershkowitz, Oscar, Steve Sandler, and me. I'm the only one who kept on going after 30.
Speaking of that, you know, if I look at your hands, for example, they don't look as if they're completely beat up, as a lot of handball players have had. You know, you seem to have kept yourself in pretty good shape when it comes to these things.
There's a certain machismo with a lot of the guys about their ability to endure pain. Albert enjoys the fact that when he dives into concrete, he gets up and he's ready to go again. I don't enjoy that. In other words, to me, that's not what the game's about. You understand? You know, they say runners are a masochist, you know, and handball's not about that, in my opinion. In other words, handball is not about enduring pain. Handball is about making the point. And what I try to do is to just make it in a way that, in other words, again, it's like karate, you know what I'm saying? You want to go like through the object, you know? So when I hit the ball, I'm not trying to like I'm not trying to like use violence on the ball. I'm just trying to like. It's hard to explain.
Well, actually, could
But I don't physically hurt myself.
right. Could we get at that a little bit? You know, the poet, it was Pindar, who pointed out that athletes come very close to artists. They're inspired. They have a feeling of the divine about them. It's almost as if they have within them the ability to invoke the divine, and they create art. Have you got a sense out there? I think Muhammad Ali did. Have you got a sense out there that you're creating art, that you're actually producing an organization of materials here out of nothing?
Well, I try to create beauty, you know.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I try to do that. In other words, if I can hit a good shot that's very low percentage, you know, that, you know, 9 out of 10 times I wouldn't make it, that doesn't deter me. You know what I'm saying? The fact that I might lose the point, that's irrelevant. I'd rather go for that shot. Now again, there's none of that in the Albert game, and this is the first time that I wasn't able to do that. And part of that might be because they changed the length of the game. In other words, it was always 2 out of 3, 21 points.
21.
So now they've changed it where the third game is 11, and it really diminishes how much freedom a person has in terms of risking. You know, I mean, you have to play much more conservative. And I think it might have affected me, you know. In other words, I don't have that freedom. I can't throw people experimental points hoping to create something nice. I just have to try to win like everyone else. And it makes for bad handball. You know, it makes for like, you know, you just kill the ball instead of like, in other words, I know exactly how fast Albert can run, for example. So I know I can tap it just so he can get it, but not so he can kill it. So he's got to come back. Then I'll like tap it high to the other corner, and I know he can reach it, but again, he's not going to be able to kill. He's going to bring it back. And now I'll rear my arm back like I'm going to kill it, and I may tap it or I may lift it, and I got him going. You know what I mean? Now that creates great tension, you know what I'm saying? Rather than just killing the ball. You know?
Right. So you are interested in you know, I mean, obviously the aesthetic aspects of this game is the thing that appeals to you.
Yeah, but I believe that with the format of the game, the way they changed it, you don't have the luxury of doing it anymore.
Right.
And since I was the only one doing it, now it's just not done.
Right.
No
Well,
one's doing it.
Isn't there that wonderful tension that occurs between it's a gladiatorial event, it's about survival ultimately, and at the same time, if a great player is involved, it's about art. It's about the dance.
Well, that's what it should be about. In other words, well, it's a Platonic concept. It's an Ayn Rand concept. It's in a way a religious concept. But anything that a person does ought to be done with an effort to transcend the limitations of humanity. In other words, if Einstein starts writing an equation on the board, he's doing it because he wants to find some kind of like truth. He wants to reveal some kind of truth. And if Van Gogh starts painting something, he wants to paint something that will evoke some kind of universal truth or beauty, and truth and beauty are kind of one in a way. So if I'm going to hit a killer, I want to hit a killer that's the ultimate killer. I want to hit the perfect killer. I want to hit a killer that's definitive, like an archetypal killer that exists. And I feel that that I'm able to do that, you see. And there are times when I can do it, you know. In other words, you know, like I'll hit a shot, and the other guy will hit a shot, and now by all laws of physics, I'm not supposed to be able to get to the ball, let's say. You know what I'm saying? I'm not supposed to be able to do it, and yet somehow you can just get to it the last second, and, you know, it's like amazing, you know what I'm saying? You know,
Right.
and that kind of, in a way, it elevates what's possible, right? So,
Right. It expands the
Yeah,
it
the
expands the
doable,
world that we know.
right, that's exactly right.
Sure.
Unfortunately, people don't press me to that point too much, so I don't have an opportunity to do it too much.
Are there certain players who do press you?
Well, the only player that, you know, in my career that we really were toe to toe for a long time was Alturas, and he was 10 years older than me. So we never really met prime to prime. So when he was very strong, I was still like a boy, and I wasn't really able to marshal the internal strength to meet him head on. And as I got stronger, he got physically weaker, you know. I mean, he's like 47 now,
Yeah.
you know. So we never really met, you know. So there was really no one, you know. Albert was very good, you know, but I was just better than Albert. So, you know.
I have a last question. Have you got a feeling that the athletes have sometimes that tragedy of decline will happen to you earlier than, let's say, a writer, a politician, that the tools of your art are not going to be as sharp, and that there will be a feeling almost of loss in your life that will come to you?
Well, I think it's possible that my bad performance this year might be the first signs of that. In other words, the fact that I wasn't able to spontaneously generate superhuman ability might be the first hint of what's going to come. You know what I'm saying? I might have just had a bad day. I don't know. But like I said, I feel that if I can no longer do what I'm capable of doing, I know it sounds pompous and arrogant, but it's not my loss alone. It's the loss of everybody. In other words, it's like, you know, don't ask for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. It's the same thing, you know, the loss of any man diminishes me because I am part of mankind, that whole thing. So if I can't, in other words, the world is much worse that Muhammad Ali cannot do what he was doing. The world is worse that Bruce Lee's gone. The world is worse that Da Vinci's gone. So even though hitting a handball may be less intrinsically worthwhile, and you can make an argument that it's not. In other words, why is hitting a handball any less important than painting a picture?
Well, it's a means to an end. It's,
right, I agree. Right,
it's
that's
the
right.
creation
That's right.
of an organization.
That's what it should be. But I think that I'm the only person who thinks along those lines that's playing. I don't think any of these guys are worrying about that. In other words, I think they're just looking to win. You know what I'm saying?
Have you got a sense of reality?
No.
Almost. No, I mean on a mental level, to have that opinion could make you feel as if you stand apart, as if you can't communicate with them.
I don't even try to communicate to any of them, because when I say this to them, they look at me like I'm nuts because they don't understand. Athletes, by and large, are stupid. You know, I mean, people that are intelligent gravitate towards a certain way of life. You know, it's usually sedentary because they're either reading or doing music or whatever. People that aren't that cerebral, they take a more physical approach to life, and they're usually running around sexualizing or playing games or gambling or whatever they're doing, you know. So most of these guys are basically stupid, you know. I mean, they're nice guys or whatever, but they're not, they have no idea what I'm talking about. So I don't bother, you know, trying to say it, you know.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Joe Durso.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, Joe. Good. That was very good. That was the kind of interview
It was
we
good. It was
had.
good for me. It was cathartic.
You're good on the camera, you know,
Thanks
Joe.
so much.
You look really good.
Well, you're biased because you're biased.
For the record, are you Matthew Paris?
For the record, I was told the first 2 years of my life that I was Matthew Paris. And when people tell me things over and over again, even that they love me, I believe them.
And Matthew Paris is your real name, not an affected name.
I think it's a very affected name and my real name.
Now, where does a nice Jewish man like yourself get a name like Matthew?
Well, first of all, I think we should be aware that of the 4 apostles, that Matthew was the only one who died in bed. I think my parents were looking for a name that suggested a comfortable and slightly boring life. Also, the original Hebrew name was Matthias, which I think I was named after a great-grandfather who came here, was a very pious man and sold knishes in the street, except he went out and he was so busy with his spiritual life that he didn't even notice his customers, and then he went home and everybody else ate his knishes. So I was basically named after this completely unworldly individual. And I think my parents were basically, as many Jewish families try to do, they try to seem as if they're like everybody else, which is, I must say, truly a tragic enterprise in anybody. And there are certain Jewish names, for example, that have become Jewish, like Eric or Brian or Sean or names like that. It's a certain kind of confusion that some Jewish people have about America.
And the name Paris, is that a
Even worse, even worse. What a name. How'd that happen to me? A terrible story, really. The name in Lithuania was Parisky. And when people came over here, they dropped the ski, but they dropped various parts of the ski. I have relatives named Parish, Parisk, and in general, it's not a practice among Jews as it is amongst. It's also not among Scandinavians and other peoples to have names that are continuation of the names of previous people. For example, in Scandinavian culture, if your name is Hans Svensson and you have a child, the son can be Sven Hansen, because it's the son of, and I think this is characteristic of a lot of old cultures. So I think the original name Paris might have been Peretz, I'm just guessing, which is a minor and rather flamboyantly violent character in the Bible.
And it's spelled Paris as in the city of
As in the
France?
city. It's a name that should belong to a homosexual Shakespearean actor. And I can't live it down, so all I can do is try to pretend as much as possible that I don't have this name.
Now, as a great interviewer, I would like to know the trick of being able to carry off a good conversation with a person when you're interviewing them, listen to what they say, and not think about what your next question is going to be.
Well, I think you have really hit upon the point, Joe, of how to do it. Interviewing is good conversation. The interviewee is, or the interviewer is a person who is at once there and also not there. The purpose of the interview is to bring out the spirit of the person who is being interviewed, but to do that, the spirit of the person who interviews has to be there. A great interviewer is a real person. If you think of an interview by David Frost or by Barbara Walters, they have a very different quality than an interview by a person who has no character, has no personality. So oddly enough, and it's paradoxical, to interview somebody, you have to be flamboyant and gregarious and aggressive yourself. You have to be open to the experience as much as the person who is being interviewed. And that person, if he or she is articulate and spiritually minded, will come back to you in a way that will not happen if you hold yourself back. You got to be there.
Okay, well, my first aggressive question to you then would be, what are you doing with 4 mice in your house?
I'm glad you asked me that. At one point, I had a whole bunch of mice. I had gray mice and white mice. I have a son who's an only child, and I wanted to give him some pets that were friendly and whom he could play with and relate